All right, welcome everyone. Nice to see you all. Okay, so today I have a relatively simple plan for us, and it is this. I just want to try to look at the text of the Torah, this week's Parsha, um, and ask the question, very simple question. Um, Here, I put it on my source sheet, and it's just like I couldn't even come up with a better title. Maybe I will by the time we podcast this. But the question that I want to ask today is this: was Esau bad? Esau. I can't say Esau because I don't know. It sounds to me like somehow like overly Protestant, but Esav is how we say it. But Esau, Esav, was he a bad guy? Was he a bad guy? That's the basic question I want to try to ask today, just by looking at the text of the Torah. And I say that deliberately because if we go into rabbinic literature, the answer is clear. Okay, and that's part of what I am grappling with. There is this phenomenon that you come up against when you start to look at rabbinic commentary, where certain characters who seem entirely sympathetic in the Torah. I don't want to say entirely because that's my whole question. Is there something in the Torah that is cluing these rabbis into their assessment as just a damning assessment? Just a damning. There are certain figures in the Torah, certain figures in rabbinic literature. When I say rabbinic literature, I mean like starting with the Midrash and the Talmud in the first and second centuries of the Common Era. Certain figures who have the dubious distinction of harasha, the wicked one, harasha. So some of those figures like Pharaoh, Paro, harasha. Okay, fine. Haman, harasha. Okay, yeah, like that's obvious. Those are the villains in the story. But there are characters who are damned by the rabbinic, I don't know, imagination assessment, who don't look so bad when we look at the Torah itself. And one of those figures is Bilam, or Balaam, the prophet. We'll have to wait to assess him in the book of Numbers, but there's an example of someone who seems like a good guy, even worships the God we worship and follows that God's orders. But the rabbis hate Bilam, hate Bilam, and we could go and try to figure out why over there. But today I want to try to figure out why it is that the rabbis hate Esav. I'm going to say Esav. Why do the rabbis hate Esav? Now, there are some obvious answers that I want to just name at the start, because we're going to try to figure out if there's anything in the text that's cluing them off. But there are some, almost like background hovering above the text concerns. And one is simply that it's the obvious, right? Esav's the other brother. Jacob's our forefather. That's our team. So Esav's the other team. It doesn't feel like a noble justification for the condemnation of an entire figure. But maybe actually the other reason is more helpful, which is that it isn't just a condemnation of an entire person, but actually an entire nation. And that's certainly one way of thinking about this, is that Esav becomes the progenitor, the father of the nation of Edom. And Edom is turns out to be one of the enemies of Israel. Famously, or at least firstly, in the Torah, we see a confrontation when in the book of Numbers, Moses tries to cross through the land of Edom, offers a kind of peaceful, we'll just would you just let your brother pass by? By the way, Moses is still calling Edom your brother, my brother, right? So there's some link there to an entire nation that becomes an enemy. And so maybe this is explanatory, either through prophecy, if you're a traditionalist, or there's a word for this, an etiology. It's like a story that was written to explain why it is that we're against, we've had this conflict with this nation, right? And we could ask this question. One of the reasons that I am interested in this question is that we could ask it of a lot of the siblings or cousins who fork off from the covenantal family in the Torah, and wonder, the same thing about Ishmael. What is the status of Ishmael, for example? But I must say that the rabbis have their suspicions about Ishmael, but you can find rabbinic literature that valorizes Ishmael. You can find rabbis named after it, Rabbi Ishmael, right? But you're never going to find a Rabbi Esau. That figure, it just receives total condemnation. And I must say, I'm not exactly sure why. Because if you look at the plain text of the story, today's Parsha, I should say, is Parshat Toldot, and it might be my favorite Parsha. It is a masterpiece. I mean, it's just a total symphonic masterpiece. There are movements and there's wordplay. Oh, I should share with you first of all, if you want to sign up for my weekly Dvar Torah, you can sign up here. And this week I wrote about some of the just incredibly intricate and sophisticated wordplay that's going on in Parshat Toldot, and that is what can I say? It's my favorite parsha, so I think it's worth a look. Here's the essay that I wrote on that this week. Okay, but we're going to just look at Parshat Toldot, this parsha, and we're just going to look at the scenes that have Esau as a player. And that's the last thing I'll say before we dive in, is that when you go and you look at the material that the rabbis are drawing from, it's actually like pretty scanty. There isn't much there. There are just two scenes of recorded dialogue here in this week's Parsha. And then we won't hear from Esau until 2 weeks from now. There's a major confrontation between Jacob and Esau. And again, we could ask that. The truth is, I'm writing like 2 weeks in advance. So I'm writing about that confrontation, which is part of why it's on my mind now. I'm actually trying to figure out so that I'll be ready, so that we'll all be ready for Vayishlach 2 weeks from now when Jacob confronts Esau. And again, it seems like Esau is acting, pretty decently to his brother, hugs and kisses him. I mean, that's also surprising, is after all of their years of bitter conflict, when they reunite, they're hugging and kissing. So what's the problem? What's the problem? And if anything is the problem, it seems from the plain text of the Torah, Jacob is the problem. Jacob is the one lying to, tricking, manipulating, right? Jacob is the one who steals a blessing from Esau and buys, though seems in a kind of manipulative way, buys the birthright from Esau. Seems like Jacob is the character we ought to be suspicious of. But then again, Jacob is our father. What are we going to do? Okay, so I think I've laid out the problem, and let's say a blessing, and we'll dive in here and take a look at some of these scenes and see if we can do. Because I guess I want to say this: I don't believe that the rabbis. Some people would say, "Oh, the rabbis want to justify Jacob, and they want to like villainize Esau in order to, justify our whole peoplehood, and they're just making stuff up." I just don't believe that that's the way the rabbis work. I mean, don't get me wrong; they might have that agenda, but they're never just going to make things up. They're always mining. These are the most sophisticated readers of text that I have ever come across. And they're finding something in the text. So let's just try. We don't have to agree with them by the end, but let's try to figure out what it is that they're sensing about Esau that would lead them to characterize him as the wicked one. Okay, so let's say a blessing and just try to focus ourselves into the sacred practice of learning Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay. All right, so let's take a look here. I'm going to give you a source sheet. And I said we're going to be mostly or almost all in the text of the Torah. This is one of those classes where we're not going to look at a lot of commentaries, but I want to just give you just one commentary, just so you have a feel for what it is the rabbis are doing. I just said it, but what do I mean the rabbis villainize Esau? And Rashi does a great job of carrying their critique all the way through the story. So every time Rashi sees an opening, he will tell you what a terrible guy Esau is. And here's an example. Esau and Jacob are twins. And we find that out when Rebecca gives birth, and here they are. They were twins, and the word for twins, it turns out, is written Kasher, meaning it's written with fewer letters than it ought to be. This is the way that it usually looks, te'omim, twins, and this is the way that it looks in our Parsha, which is missing a couple of letters. Now, in Hebrew, you can get away with that because you can vowelize differently. You know, you assume vowels to be there and you don't need the full spelling. But it's always noteworthy when a word is missing one letter, let alone two letters of its standard spelling. So that's where Rashi jumps in here. V'hine tomim, there were twins. The word for twins is written defective, chaser. Whilst, that's a nice old-timey word. Whilst in the case of Tamar, now Tamar gives birth to twins as well, Peretz and Zerach. While in the case of Tamar, it's written Te'omim in the full spelling. Why? Because in the latter case, both children proved righteous, whilst here one was righteous and the other wicked. Okay? And I don't even like proved righteous because it doesn't say that as if, oh, we'll see eventually. It just says Lefi shneim tzadikim, because they were both children were righteous. Yeah. While I'm having a hard time erasing this. While here one was righteous and the other wicked, and I changed that to suggest that what Rashi is indicating here is that Esau was bad from the start. He was born bad. Now there are other midrashim that say no. Actually, they were both good until they were 13, and then they started to diverge. Lots of ways of describing this, but one way or another, we're going to end up calling Esau the wicked one. So let's try to figure out why that is. And we could probably just open now and start speculating, but let's look at the actual text of the Torah. We have some material, we have some dialogue. It's very scanty, but we'll see. Is that a word? Scanty? That's a word, right? Yeah. We'll see what we are going to do with it. Okay. We'll see what we can do with it. All right. So let's take a look here, and then we'll open it up. A pretty simple method today. Just going to look at the few pieces of actual dialogue that we have with Esau and see if we can figure out what's going wrong here. All right, here's the line that we just saw in Rashi. There are those twins. Okay. Vayimalu yameha laledet v'hine tomim bevitna. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. Okay, now we should start paying attention because they are described differently. They seem to be fraternal twins, not identical, because that's not for sure. But the first one emerged red. Vayetze arishon admoni kulo ka'aderet se'ar, like a hairy. He was red and hairy. A hairy mantle is a funny way to put it, but as if he had a hairy cloak all over him. So they named him Esau. Esau sounds like like Seyar, Esav. Esav might mean he's done. He's like all done.
No,
He's
don't want that.
Ooh, I hear someone's not muted. Okay. So they named him Esav. And then his brother emerged holding on to the heel of Esav, so they named him Jacob. Jacob means the heel grabber, the one who grabbed onto the heel. Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. And when the boys grew up, Esav became a skillful hunter, Ish Yodea Tzayid, a man of the outdoors, Ish Sadeh, a man of the field, literally. But Jacob became a mild man who sat in tents. V'Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshev Oalim. Isaac favored Esav because he had a taste for game in his mouth. I think maybe there's a typo there. Because a taste for game was in his mouth, but Rebecca favored Jacob. Let's just stop there, okay? Because that line there tells us something. There's a split, and this will become important. The father prefers or favors Esav. The mother prefers or favors Jacob. And all the information that we have about that so far is that one came out hairy, red and hairy, and that one of them was a hunter, and one of them was a quiet, mild-mannered tent dweller. Okay. Now, okay, so let's just see, which one do you favor? Which one do you prefer? Is there anything already that indicates, ooh, I don't like hairy people, you know what I mean? Or I don't like hunters, or maybe, is there something there? What do we see so far that might give us some indication that there's something wrong? Any thoughts? No, often our first up to bat, no apology.
Well, I can speak from experience as a twin, or go straight to the text.
Perfect. I forgot that. Yeah, look at that background. We've got twins. Okay.
Yeah, speaking from experience as a twin, but we're always trying to find our own identity. Not helped at all, but going to the text by Rebecca and Yitzhak favoring one over the other, which just makes a whole mess of problems. But in my experience, we were each other's best friends growing up, and sometimes enemies, more often best friends, constant playmates, constantly with each other, trying to form our own identities, but still being bound at the hip. So the parents, I think, made the issue of who was the favored, and that always causes problems.
Okay, brilliant comment spoken from a man who knows. But it's so helpful, both to hear your experience, but also to reflect, I think you're right, on the phenomenon of twins, which we just saw in the Rashi is twinned, repeats itself. It occurs twice in the Torah. There are two sets of twins. And look, we know sibling rivalry has been a theme starting from the days of Cain and Abel. There's tension between brothers, but there's something about the twin phenomenon that makes that tension all the sharper, because there is, like in previous sibling rivalries, there's always a question of who is the firstborn, who is the inheritor. With twins, that question becomes delicate, because it's hard. There's hardly someone who's older and younger, though there is. Esav is the firstborn, but does it matter? So that in itself, the very kind of biological phenomenon of twins, creates a new dynamic of tension, where we have already seen tense dynamics among siblings. And then what Noah says, sort of even more textured reflection on twins, which is that because you are so close when you're a twin, you're constantly trying to to find your distinct identity. And if that is true from the twin experience, then it does some job of explaining, first of all, what the rabbis are doing when they are also trying to distinguish between, are these just two identical figures? No, they must be, there's something different about them. And maybe it also does some job of explaining why Isaac and Rebekah are like finding distinctions between them, though they seem to be, emerging at the same time. And maybe it even does some work of explaining why Jacob and Esau themselves went separate ways. Okay, so that's all very, very helpful. All right, let's keep going, Ariella.
Well, what I was first struck by when you said hairy was when he took his brother's blessing. He put on a fur coat to mimic that hairiness. So, like, to me, the hairy theme kind of keeps coming back.
Right.
And
That's right.
I also posted in the chat where Rabbi Arthur Green gave an amazing article on twins. So that's in the chat.
Okay, so let's pick up on Ariella's focus here on his hairiness. Now, wait a minute, I'm like a Ashkenazi Jewish guy, like I was like I've got some hair of my own, and I don't want to be condemned for it. But maybe there is something about that image that from the start, and remember he's red and hairy too, like pulsing with blood and life, perhaps, that there's something, I don't know, beastly or savage about Esau, right? Like, I say this is a hairy guy, okay? So I'm owning it, but like, what is, like, is that maybe part of the clue is that and then Jacob is smooth and delicate. Are we beginning to, this is one line of analysis we could take, are we beginning to see a rabbinic preference for a more refined, delicate kind of, not the hunter, but the quiet lad, bookish lad, right? Okay, Payam.
The key word is hunter. Genesis is the transition or the winning of agriculture over hunters. And the problem you have is the Cain and Abel story, in which Cain is actually the farmer. So the rabbinical tradition is to almost redemption of Cain and turning that story into, no, that's the hunters saying we're the farmers were bad, and then transitioning from the farmers being good and the hunters being bad. So Ishmael is a hunter. All the other foes are going to be hunters.
Good, excellent. Okay, that's also an extremely incisive comment, and we've heard this analysis come up in our class before, that there is some transition happening in the ancient world from hunter-gatherers to an agricultural society, and that the Torah wants to privilege. This is a sort of, it's not exactly a critical, like, you could be a traditionalist and still believe this, but it is critical historical in the sense that it is like trying to take into account like what's going on in the world at the time and how can we understand the Torah stories in light of that. And so maybe Payam suggests, or Payam didn't say maybe, but Payam suggests that that's what's going on here, is that Esau is the hunter figure. And we don't like hunters in this tradition. We don't like, it's not just, overly macho masculinity that we're pushing back against, but actually it is a move towards a different model for a man, for a household, for a society, and we're moving away from hunter-gatherer. Okay, so that may be a polemic that's going on underneath. I would just say, and I kind of like, I've heard this analysis before. I think it's a very intriguing and helpful one. I'm always wondering, though, when I hear it, why? Okay, so there's a transition, but why would you want to villainize the hunter? What's wrong with that? Even if society is moving in that way, I've never totally understood what I don't know, Payam, if you want to follow up here, but what's the problem? Like, so okay, so we're not hunting anymore, but you want to make the hunter an evil character? This is like a bit of a strange move.
I mean, it's anthropological. It's the Homo sapiens versus the Neanderthals. When there's actual war between the two tribes, and one of the tribes is the hunter tribe, and the other one is the farming tribe, and one, I mean, did wipe out the other one. So,
so this is like a sort of echo of a Homo sapien Neanderthal battle.
that's the way I see it.
Interesting. All right. Let's leave that there. Let's take a couple more thoughts on just that. I want to get into the dialogue itself, but let's just take a couple more. We've already got so much off just a few clues here, and this is exactly the right kind of work. This is the work that the rabbis are doing, just picking up on clues and trying to infer from them. So let's hear from Jason.
Yeah, I mean, just taking a step back, you said in the beginning that the rabbis wouldn't be making things up. They're not going to put things into the text that aren't there, which, sure, that makes sense. But couldn't it also be, it's possible to read any text in multiple ways. Two lawyers can come to the same evidence from two very different directions. It is, what I want to say, it's like, I would think it would be intolerable from a devout standpoint for there to be a mistake here in the lineage. Like it should not have been an error that it goes through Jacob. So it's very uncomfortable, it seems necessary to vilify Esau. And I just don't know why it couldn't be a kind of confirmation bias in the reading that enables you to pick up on various details and put together a story. I mean, frankly, I think it's a more interesting story with the confusion and the complexity, with the question there about, like, why is it that the scheming brother should get ahead? Why are we okay with that? Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
You're right. Yep, you're right. I want to just admit that that framework is perfect, is a perfectly legitimate and strong framework. And I think you're right that I may have, I wanted to state that I believe the rabbis to be very keen readers above all. And so I want to caution us away from just saying, whatever, that's not in there at all. They came up with it on their own. And I do think that they're always at least justifying their interpretations with textual clues. But what you're saying is important and is a sort of a bigger point, which is that they may not be making it up, that if they are simply understanding the arc of the story. The arc of the story is that Jacob prevails, is the character we follow, is our ancestor, is valorized, is like this story needs us to find a redemptive narrative for Jacob, and that requires justifying the covenant. So if Esau seems to be in this parsha seems to be cheated or victimized, well, okay, that reading is possible, but the rabbis, it's not just that they're making things up. They need to look at the larger arc of the story and understand that this, for some reason, God seems to prefer. How about putting it that way? The Torah does, God does, the lineage that we have inherited seems to prefer Isaac and then Ishmael and then, on and on and on. And so that's the rabbis are doing work that needs to be done. I think that's a perfectly legitimate approach here. Joni Brenner.
Thank you. So Isaac is 60, right? So what I think happened is Rebecca had an affair because living with Isaac was so sad and depressing. And the first man is a redhead, and the second one is Isaac's baby.
Oh, wow. It's a wild interpretation. Love that. Wow. But how does that, how could they, I don't think genetically that works with the twins. How could twins be from two different fathers?
Well, we have a story, right?
Okay,
I
okay,
mean,
all right, fair
we
enough.
don't know.
I feel like maybe there is a medical history out there somewhere where someone was in, but I don't think,
Yeah.
I'm not
I
sure.
mean, it's just his coloring, how he looks. This was the guy. This was the fun guy. I mean, this guy was going to get her. She needed a baby.
You know, it's funny because there is a midrash, Joni, that says that people were very suspicious of Isaac's birth, born to these old people, and they thought they had been together for so long, there's no way they suddenly had kids, and so they started to say, oh, it must have been she had an affair. And God made Isaac look exactly like Abraham so everybody would know. Okay, so but that's just a way of saying that your suspicion is it seems wild, but it's not one the rabbis haven't thought of. But I think that the twins things makes it especially wild interpretation. But I love it. I love the I love the speculation. All right, let's take one more before we move a little forward. Allison.
So what I've been thinking about is you used the word wicked when you were talking about how Esau is remembered, and it made me think of Passover and like the 4 children in the Passover story. We have the wicked child, and the wicked one is the one who says, like, why are you telling me this story about you? As if like it didn't affect him also. And I guess what's coming up for me is Esau sells his birthright like so readily. You know, like he's not valuing the work that Jacob put into, you know, cooking the food, the lentils. He says like, oh, give me some of that red stuff, which is sort of crude. So it's a bit disrespectful, not just to Jacob, but like to all those who like are in the home and make food, you know, like that labor of love that is food. And maybe like that combined with how easily he's like, well, I'm going to die anyway, so just take my birthright, as if it doesn't matter. Like it flies in the face of the kind of like respect that our main characters have for their parents. And yeah, it doesn't have like the door thing.
That's an excellent reading. Allison gives us just an excellent reading, and she's sort of positioned as the last commentator on the text we just looked at, but really Allison is the first and very sharp commentator on the text we're about to see. So Allison sets us up nicely for the next piece here. Let's just take a look at exactly what Allison is talking about, because she's really been able to hit all of the important notes here. When we look at this next piece of dialogue, remember what Allison said. He sells his birthright so easily. He refers to the food as just like, give me some of that stuff. He says like, what do I need with a birthright? I'm going to die anyway. I mean, some of this language is very, very extreme. Let's take a look here. And especially the last line, when we ask, what are the rabbis picking up on in the Torah itself? Let's take a look at the last line here. Once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Vayazed Yaakov Nazid, Vayavo Esav min hasadeh v'hu ayef. Esau came in from the open famished. And Esau said to Jacob, give me some of that red stuff. In Hebrew, it's haliteni na min ha'adom hazeh. Give me some of that red stuff. That's what you called it, that red stuff? To gulp down. I want to swallow it, for I am famished. Which is why he was named Edom. Edom is the name of the nation that Esau will become, but it also means red. So it's like he was called the red. Jacob said, first sell me your birthright. Okay. That's quite an offer, birthright for a bowl of lentils. But Esau said, Hine anochi holech lamut. I'm going to die. I am at the point of death is like not really the Ani anochi holech lamut. I am going to die. V'lama ze li bechora. So what do I need a birthright for? Now that is a line that has stunned me again and again. There's something existential, almost nihilistic about this that's worth thinking about. But it also can come off as, disparaging and crass and cynical. But Jacob said to him, swear to me first. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And now listen to this last line. Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went away, and thus did Esau spurn the birthright. Look at how many verbs there are, and it works better in the Hebrew here. V'Yaakov natan le'Esav lechem ve'unazid adashim. Jacob gives him the bread and the lentils. Vayochal, vayesht, vayakam, vayelach, vayivez Esav et bechora. All of these verbs. He ate, he drank, he got up, he left, he disgraced the birthright. It's like there's something so kind of rapid fire. Like he's just snatching and eating and drinking and getting up and leaving. And that was the moment he sold his birthright. And he doesn't seem to care. It's just like one of a series of actions, like, who cares? Okay. So Allison did a lovely job of giving those pieces of evidence as a case against Esau's seriousness, his sincerity, his integrity, his respect for, I don't know, basic family values. All right, so let's see. What do you think about this scene? Let's turn to Deborah.
So I've always seen Esau as ADD. And I think of him as Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. Tom Sawyer's following all the rules, and Huck Finn's going out to the territories. It has to be active. It has to be out in the field. And so the fact that there's so many verbs it's just sort of underscoring that kind of personality. And we have demonized that as Huck Finn was somewhat demonized in literature, but Huck Finn comes out actually as a hero. He protects Jim, and I think we owe it to our biblical character to not see him as an evil guy, to see him as just a different kind of personality with different kind of personality traits.
Good. Okay, great. I'm glad we're not losing the possibility of a redemption for the character of Esau. And what Deborah says is such a helpful framework. There is, maybe the rabbis, I suggested earlier, preferred a certain kind of character or a certain kind of masculinity, but that's not necessarily what the Torah is presenting us. The Torah is presenting us two different character types, which, by the way, our forefather Isaac preferred one of, and our foremother Rebecca preferred another one of. They're just different characters. The famous phrasing that becomes an emblem for this is Hakol kol Yaakov ve'yadayim yedei Esav. The voice, Isaac says this when he can't figure out who's standing in front of him. He says the voice is Jacob's, but the hands are the hands of Esau's, because he's got like those that fur coat but it becomes a kind of a symbol, like our power in Israel is our voice, meaning our speech, meaning our learning and our intellectual life. But there's this other kind of power in the world, which is physical power. And we're so quick to privilege intellectual over hands-on practical knowledge. But the truth is, that's very important too. It's half of the equation. And actually, maybe what we should be seeking, I think Deborah's comments begin to suggest that, we were given twins. They're two sides of the same human personality. And we need both. And the great tragedy, this is starting to kind of get towards the end. We don't have to land on this conclusion, but we might say that the great tragedy of this story is that one of the children has to be privileged when they both have virtues and qualities. And I'm only vaguely remembering, so I can't cite it. I want to say in the name of Rav Kook, first chief rabbi of Israel. But it is true that in the foundation of Israel and in the modern state of Israel, in this sort of new society and an attempt to create a new kind of Jew, one of the things that they were pushing for was a reclaiming of the physicality of Jews, that we had become too divorced from our bodies. And I think it's Rav Kook who says we need to combine the hands of Esau with the voice of Jacob. Like, both of those are strengths in the world. They're different kinds of personalities. Anyway, now I'm starting to repeat myself, but Deborah said it best. So you hear the point, and I think that's a very, very compelling framework for redemption of Esau and Jacob. Maybe we could actually celebrate them both in some way. Maybe that's something that we're missing in our usual analysis of this story. Okay, great. Suzanne.
Yeah, I think the dialogue is almost humorous. Like, I feel like we miss some of the tone when we're like, and so he just got up and he sold his birthright. I feel like this could almost be like a skit. Like, if you had like like a married person like saying to the other person, and like kind of the tit for the tat, or, you know, siblings. Like, I'm the parent of both identical and fraternal twins, and they're constantly at each other with one jibe or another and trying to pull one over the other and saying, well, I was born a minute before you were, so I get to go first on this board game, or whatever it is. It's ridiculous, but they're always at it. And so I almost feel like the dialogue is, if I were a comedian, I could like make a great skit out of that.
Wow. Okay. First of all, I love that, like, the real experts here. We have twins and a mother of two sets of twins. I mean, this is a real expert here. So I really appreciate the perspective. But also, I think that the humanizing, the sort of normalizing of this sibling rivalry. Oh no, who's going to prevail? We make the stakes so high when we talk about Genesis. But the truth is, yeah, siblings quarrel. I quarreled with my brother. Twins, of course, quarrel like that. That's just the way it is. And you're right. Like, you know, give me some of that stew. Well, sell me your birthright first. It feels almost like it maybe it's supposed to be funny, but certainly supposed to be human. And I think that comment is especially helpful because we don't often stop to remember that these are very young men, boys, really. And even in we're going to look at next, the central drama of this Parsha, which is when Jacob steals the blessing from Esau, really, it's Rebekah that put him up to it. And really, it's Isaac that puts Esau up to it. And they are not entirely, volitional actors. They are influenced by the forces around them. They're just young people trying to figure out how. Jacob is very nervous about going in to deceive his father. So is this really their fault? Is it really so unusual? Is it really so weird that I'm I get the birthright? No, I get the birth. I mean, it's like, this is the kids. So that is an important kind of perspective to keep in mind. All right, let's take one more comment from Irene.
So you asked us to think of why Esau is seen as a bad guy, but I also want to understand like why Rivka made the distinction that one is different than the other. And I'm thinking that the big looming story in the background is the story of the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, and how much he was so willing to give up his son, being so passionate. Just God says, go up, and he says, Hineni, I'm ready to go. And that very impulsive, passionate approach to living life. Maybe Rebecca saw it as dangerous. I don't want somebody who's like willing to go and sacrifice and be quick. And the way Esau responded, like, yes, give me the food, I'll eat it, I get up. And so she got nervous. It's like, I want a religion that's much more mild-mannered, that's more, subdued, that's more rational, that takes time, that spends time in the tent, praying and studying, and then takes action. And that's why she decided to be more active, not like Sarah who, lost her life because she let the passion of Abraham take over.
Wow, what a fascinating analysis. That is real. In just a few quick sentences, wow, Irene gives us a whole very compelling analysis of the legacy of the binding of Isaac, and also the selection of Isaac over Ishmael. There's trauma in the earlier generation, both trauma about one needing to prevail and the other one needing to be kicked out of the house. And also Irene suggests something more profound and chilling, which is that the victor, the legacy, the direction of this covenant went through a terrible trial, as if that was what was necessary to ensure the covenant, is Isaac being willing to sacrifice himself, and Abraham being willing to kill his son, and all of this violence and all of this savagery. And, there's Isaac looking for the next bold, savage man in the family. And maybe Rebecca's saying, Rebecca comes in and just understands something's got to change. Because that is a fact of this Parsha. Whatever else we might consider, Rebecca is the grand architect in this generation, and she is the one who comes in and says, it can't be this way, it has to go a different way. And maybe Irene is supplying us some of the reasons that there's something about the way that it's been either or, and the either or has been won through, look at what Cain did. It's always been violent, and Esau is more violence, or the suggestion of more violence. Okay, I love everything you said, Irene. Was just so I haven't thought of it that way, and that's a very powerful reading. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. I want to take a look at one more piece of dialogue, and here I think it's important because if we were able to, with Allison's help a lot, we were able to kind of find clues in the first dialogue that might lend us to cast a suspicious eye at Esau. This dialogue, it's the kind of the aftermath of Esau having had the blessing stolen from him. This is the one that always pulls my heartstrings. Here is the moment where if I ask this question every year, is Esau such a bad guy? I ask it in this moment because here it seems to me the Torah is begging us to feel some sympathy for Esau. And what do we do with that? Okay. So let's take a look. The story, just to remind us, is that Isaac says to Esau, I want to give you a blessing. That blessing seems to be important. He says, go and get me some food and we'll have a meal together and that will warm me up and I'll give you a blessing. And Rebecca overhears that and then says to Jacob, oh my gosh, I'm going to cook a meal. You run in, pretend to be Esau, dress in his clothes and take the blessing. And that's what happens. And that's the great sort of, you thought selling the birthright was a big deal. This is well, let's just look at how Esau reacts. It's really quite heartbreaking. So no sooner had Jacob left the presence of his father Isaac, after Isaac had just finished blessing Jacob unknowingly, than his brother Esau came in back from his hunt. He too prepared a dish and brought it to his father. And he said to his father, let my father sit up and eat of his son's game so that you may give me your innermost blessing. His father Isaac said to him, who are you? And he said, I am your son Esau, your firstborn. And all of a sudden, Isaac was seized with a very violent trembling. It's very, very, very haunting line. Who was it then, he demanded, that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate of it before you came, and I blessed him, and now he must remain blessed. I don't know why that is. Commentators wonder, but okay. Now listen to this. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst into a wild and bitter sobbing. And said to his father, bless me too, father. Bless me too. But he answered, your brother came with guile and took away your blessing. And Esau, and this is remarkable, he plays on the name of Jacob. Was he named Jacob that he might grab away from me these two times? First, he took away my birthright, and now he's taken away my blessing. Esau kind of puts all the pieces together. And he added, have you not reserved a blessing for me? I mean, it's just heartbreaking. And Isaac answered, saying to Esau, but I have made him master over you. and I have given all his brothers for servants. I've given him all his brothers for servants, and sustained him with grain and wine. What then can I still do for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, Habracha achat hi lacha, avi, barcheni gam ani avi. Haven't you got one blessing left for me? Bless me too. And Esau wept aloud. V'yisai Esav kolo v'yefk. He wept aloud. And then his father gives him a blessing, but it's a lesser blessing. I'll leave that off because I mostly just wanted to get to Esau's. I mean, how can you not feel for the guy? I mean, has the whole mood in the room switched? I mean, don't we feel bad for Esau? Could this be a bad guy? I mean, what a poor, tragic character. Aren't we supposed to sympathize with Esau in this moment? Aren't we supposed to want him to have gotten the blessing? What do you make of this? What do you make of this? All right, I want to see some hands that I will call on folks before, but I saw, I'll call on folks if you haven't had a chance to speak yet. And I saw, by the way, that Ellie had a hand up earlier and I missed it in the last round. So Ellie may well, but I see Ruth has got her hand raised. Ruth Persky.
What blessing had he in reserve for Yaakov?
Right. There's something strange about this. He does go on to give a different blessing to Esau. So one wonders, why can't you just give a blessing to everybody? But it seems like the first blessing was meant for the inheritor. There's a lot more to be said about this, but that the context suggests that. And then he does go on and say, okay, I'll give you a blessing, Esau. See, your abode shall enjoy the fat of the earth and the dew of the heaven above. Yet by your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. I mean, I'm not sure that Esau really ended up serving Jacob. That's a different question. But when you grow restive, you shall break his yoke from your neck. Now Esau harbored. So that's the blessing. That's the blessing. Okay. So yeah, like, couldn't they both have had a blessing? There's something else going on here that suggests like there's some built-in tension. It has to be one or the other. And that's a problem maybe that we could I mean, this is Deborah's question. Like, why does it have to be one or the other? Why are we choosing one or the other? Why do we have to select, right, instead of to include? Which is, by the way, what happens eventually in the next generation after more sibling rivalry. Jacob eventually blesses all his children. Couldn't we have that here? All right. We're running out of time. We'll take one last comment from Ellie, who's had her hand up for a while. Ellie, you there? Ellie Simon? I think we can hear you. No. Yes, there you are.
Okay. Well, just for a moment, because I know we're pressed for time now. I think it goes back to Rebecca. I think she was a really domineering mother. She chose to favor one son over the other, and Jacob, being this intellectual, peace-loving fellow, did what his mother told him to do, and it's still happening when poor Esau has to practically beg to get the blessing from his father. And I'm really simplifying it, but I have this thing about the mother and the son, and Jacob just did what mom told him to do, and it was his mother's opinions on him and his brother, and even though they were twins, but it's a mother thing. That's
okay. All right. That's so interesting to hear you say. You started to say that, and I don't monitor the chats, but I can see them pop up. And as you started to say that, I saw Chaim type into the chat, maybe Isaac is the villain in all of this, which is just to say, I love Ellie's perspective. Yeah. I think it's legitimate.
Yeah.
We could blame Rebecca. We could blame Isaac. Or should we blame Esau? Or should we blame Jacob? There's a lot. This is part of why it's such a masterpiece of a Parsha. The perspectives here are sort of like a Rashomon, you know, like who exactly is guiding the action here? But I'll just say two last things in closing. And there's more to be done here. We could then dive into the rabbinic literature. And of course, keep in mind, in 2 weeks, we'll see Esau and Jacob, the last recorded dialogue that we have of Esau. But two last things. One, I purposely cut us off. Esau seems so sympathetic in this scene, but then I didn't read you the last line. And the last line, of course, is, now Esau harbored a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing which his father had given him. That we understood. And Esau said to himself, let but the mourning period of my father come, and I will kill my brother Jacob. Now, that's not good. So, okay, like maybe that's enough. I mean, this has been a bad, terrible family drama, but murder? I will. And the way he puts it, wait till my father dies and then I'll kill my brother. It feels like, whoa, maybe this guy is a little unhinged. So there's more to be kind of unpacked there, but that's one clue. And then the other one I want to just, like, as I close the class with, running out of time, I just want to give us a couple of last things to consider. That's one of them. After all, Esau says he's going to kill Jacob. That seems like a bad idea, or that seems like taking things to the next level. The other thing to monitor in this week's Parsha, we looked at the two snippets of dialogue, but one thing that we didn't look at, which is happening along the way, is who Esau is marrying. And there's something just to note here. There are two little moments of recording. Let's see. Now, we looked at Genesis chapter 25 and Genesis chapter, 27. But in the middle is Genesis chapter 26. And at the end of that chapter, it just mentions in passing, when Esau was 40 years old, he took to wife Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemat, daughter of Elon the Hittite, both Hittites, Canaanites, and they were a source of bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah. Okay, so they didn't like his wives. Now, that's not a good enough reason to write him out of the covenant, but maybe it is, because take a look at the last thing that we read in our Parsha. When Esau saw, this is literally the last lines of our Parsha. When Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him off to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there, charging him as he blessed him, you shall not take a wife from among the Canaanite women. Now, that's interesting. Esau just did that. And Jacob obeyed his father and mother and gone to Paddan Aram. Esau realized that the Canaanite women displeased his father Isaac. Here, he's been trying to please his father Isaac. So Esau, and now this is an interesting solution, Esau went to Ishmael and took to wife, in addition to the wives he had, Machalat, the daughter of Ishmael, son of Abram, the sister of Nevayot. Okay, I just threw a lot at you just in the end, but you can see this is another way, just like as we leave contemplating what's so bad about Esau, one of the things we might pay attention to is this guy clearly displeasing his parents, but is there something significant about the fact that he's marrying Canaanite women? He tries to solve it by marrying Ishmael's daughter, but that doesn't, Ishmael's also a tense relationship, so that there's something, for all of the tension that we saw in last week's Parsha of making sure that Isaac finds a non-Canaanite woman, so there's something there about Esau maybe playing the field, literally, that also seems problematic. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a PS. There's a couple of PSs there. Esau has a murderous rage, and Esau's marrying outside the family, and both, we've offered a lot of theories, explanatory theories. Why is Esau so condemned? But here are a couple of other pieces of information to keep in mind. Okay, I wish you all a good Shabbos, and I will see you all next week for Parshat Vayetze, when we take off and follow Jacob for pretty much the rest of Genesis. Okay, bye everyone.